The record button is just spinning. It's not distorting. I don't know what's going on. Uh, First we'll have Emma has just a quick announcement about style, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time just talking about pods, so we can make sure that I do my best to answer any questions you all have about that. So, Emma?
Hi, everybody. We're finally getting around to pull quotes again. I know we talked about it previously, years before, months before, but we're gonna dig into and get those redesigned and change them up to something different. So we ask that any ideas that you have that you would like to be considered for our new style of pull quotes, please mock those up. You don't have to necessarily mock it up on like a dummy page. It can just be the pull quote itself. If it requires something special, I guess that it would call for a mock-up on a dummy page with some body copy. But just make sure that you do that and you have that sent to the hub managers by next Wednesday, July 28th. Thank you.
All right. So hopefully you all read the email from earlier today announcing that we are officially forming the pod, and that I get to figure out how to make that thing work. So I'm actually very, very excited about that. I think it's going to be, it's going to make our lives really a lot easier. I think the plan is that the first papers will start rolling into the pod right after Labor Day. And so we will have a team of dedicated editors that will include the copy desk and some other people that we will be adding between now and then. And our newspapers will be responsible for creating content. So they will just create stories, and then they'll put them on a big list that the pod editors will then take and use to create budgets for us. They'll make sure everything's linked. They will work through with us, any questions we have, if stories need to be cut, headlines, all of those things. So we're going to have dedicated people whose jobs it is to oversee the print production. And so if you ask a question in Slack, somebody should be able to answer you really quickly. There'll be people who are more familiar with the print process and who will become even more familiar with the print process the further we go through. So they will better be able to, budget pages appropriately, to know the spacing on a page and all those little things that some of our editors really struggle with that make things difficult for us. So all of those things are going to be dealt with by having this dedicated team. With this dedicated team, we're also going to work on identifying areas of duplicated work so that we can stop duplicating a lot of that work. For example, one thing that we've talked about is that on e-edition nights, there's really no reason that we need to build the twin story into 9 different sports sections. We just have one page that has twin stories, and then each paper's special, their own sports page can be their local content, and then they can have multiple shared sports pages that get added. And then with that time that we gain back by the 8 people who now don't have to add that same twin story to the section that they're working on, then we can work on creating more shared content. We can work on more graphic heavy presentations of different thing. We can work on building more graphics to accompany stories. We can work on, coming up with, individual like print only graphics. If there's something that you think of that would make a great thing, or if a, reporter has put together a story that we look at and we're like, okay, well, this is good, but what would be better is if this was a timeline for print. And then we can work on all of those kinds of things. We're also talking about all the abilities that our e-edition has that right now we're not taking advantage of because our editors don't have the time to work with those and figure out what they can do and how their readers would like them. And we don't really have the time to figure out the technical piece of all of those things, but we do have the ability to add video, photo galleries. We can link like documents and things like that within our e-edition pages. And right now we're not doing any of that just because nobody has the capacity to add that to their work on our side or on the editorial side. And so we're going to be building in efficiencies with the goal of being able to really focus on quality and providing more value in that e-paper so that on the editorial side, their time can be better spent. They can focus on creating really compelling content. And then on our side, our focus can be on making the best use of that content instead of on duplicating so much of the work. So there's a lot planned with that. Some of the details have still to be figured out, but I'm very excited for it. And truly, I think that, by the time it's all rolled out, which the expectation is by the end of the calendar year, that all of our papers will be on the pod. And so it will just be that small group of editors that we deal with for everything. By the time it's all rolled out, your jobs are going to be so much easier. You're going to be dealing with pod editors who are experts in what they're doing. It's going to make things, I think, a lot less frustrating. I think a lot of the day-to-day things that cause frustration are going to be dealt with in the system. And the great thing about it is that since I am overseeing both departments, it's really within my, I don't want to say my powers because that makes it sound like I'm drunk with the power, but it's kind of within my powers, to say like, okay, this isn't working. So we have to figure out a different way to, make our two departments work really well together so that we are saving time on both sides, making things work as smoothly as possible, and really making smart choices to use all of our resources in terms of technology and in terms of you all as people the very best way that we can. And just focus on doing really great work instead of so many of the things right now that are causing us headaches that don't need to. One of the very first things that we're going to do when the pod takes over, and I know Emma has been dancing in her seat every time this comes up, is that the very first thing is that everybody's going to be switched to our standardized budget. So all of our budgets will look the same. They'll be set up the same. We're going to make sure that we're using the same vocabulary when we're talking about things. So it's really clear what's meant by different things. And Paula says, yay, I agree. Like, I think it's, a lot of these things that we just have a lot of headaches with right now, we're going to go in and get those addressed. As you all know, 5 years ago when we started the hub, 5 years, 2 months, and what are we at? I'm bad at math. 16 days ago when we started this, it was a lot of just do the best you can, make it work, and we'll figure it out later. And I feel like this is really finally we're really going to figure it out. And this new department of the pod is being started with a lot more thought than we were able to put into the initial setup of the design hub, so that we can make sure we're starting this right in the first place, getting it set up the way that we need to for it to really be a benefit to everyone. I'm very excited for it. The two managers of the pod will be Matt Corey. I'm sure many of you have worked with Matt. He has been in this industry for about 30 years. And, he's had a ton of jobs he's been a page designer. He's been an editor, now running the copy desk and all kinds of things. He knows what he's doing. He's going to be phenomenal on that team. And then Rob Jeffries, I think most of you have probably worked with Rob in his capacity, doing a lot of the e-edition budgets for our different properties, and as our wire editor, just being in Slack and answering different questions and stuff like that. And Rob, again, is someone who does great work, really knows what he's doing. And they're both incredibly excited for the opportunities that this presents for us to provide our readers with great value, to take the workload off the newsrooms, and also just to make things easier and less frustrating all around. So I'm very excited about it. Some of the details of all the pieces we haven't totally figured out yet. We'll be figuring all of that out over the next few weeks before we roll out at the beginning of September. But I want to tell you all what we know right now, and that this is definitely going to change your job, but it's going to change it in a good way. The work that you're doing will largely be similar, but we're hoping to provide you with more opportunities to focus on the design work instead of focusing on how long you've had to wait for that editor to respond to you and all those kinds of things. So I'm guessing that you all have questions, and so I want to answer those questions best I can. So what all do you have? All right. I'll give you a moment all to type in. Again, I think this is, it's just going to mean great things for all of us. I'm trying to think of what other questions I've been asked already that I can answer for all of you. One thing that we're discussing has to do with what Emma mentioned earlier regarding style and things like that. So we're going through and looking at each paper and the FAQs that we had set up a long time ago for each paper to figure out what things we're still doing that are kind of wonky for each paper so that we can work to standardize the things that it makes sense to standardize. Of course, there are some things where it's going to make sense to let the paper have a little bit of a different style, but to streamline where it makes sense to streamline. So again, it's not so many different things that need to be remembered. Paula says, when do we expect it to happen? Our plan is that the pod editors would take over the first papers that they will take over budgeting for the week after Labor Day, or the week of Labor Day, I guess. So, but the exact, like whether they're going to take over Tuesday for the Wednesday paper, or if they'll start with, the Wednesday for Thursday edition, we don't have 100% decided yet, but that's the plan. Mark said, can you talk a little bit more about the streamlined content? Will papers all have to use that twin story, for example, exactly the same? On e-edition day, like, what we're envisioning is that, for e-edition days, we would just build a shared twins page because we get 2 twin stories from the Pioneer Press every day. We get a gamer and then we get a notebook. And so we can put those along with like the baseball glance and the twins box score. And then that can be sent as a shared page that will just go on everyone's e-edition. So for some of them, yes, all the papers will have them just the same in their e-edition, because we know from looking at our analytics that it's not like there's a ton of people that are reading the Fargo paper and the Duluth paper and Dickinson paper. So they're going to be like, I think this twins thing looks the same because it's, a broader thing, and it's not going to affect the quality of the product that we put up for the readership. It's just going to make it simpler on our end to make sure everybody gets that. And additionally, a lot of times what we're waiting for at the end of the night is that national content. So we don't need to have, 4 or 5 different sports pages out waiting for that one story when we can just do it once. And if a paper wants twins on their sports cover, it's just going to kind of depend on the day. It's not necessarily going to be, you can never use the twins. The hope is that they'll focus on their local content, and then their local content will take over for sports. But, like one of the things we're talking about is, so the North Dakota legislature is in session, and we're just going to do a North Dakota legislature page that will just appear in all the North Dakota pages instead of us placing those same stories in all the North Dakota papers. But obviously, if the news that comes out of the legislature is important enough that it should go on people's A1s, then it'll go on their A1s. And we do have the ability to, if that news is important enough to Jamestown, but not necessarily to Dickinson, Fargo, and Grand Forks, that Dickinson, Fargo, and Grand Forks can get a shared page and Jamestown doesn't. So we have a lot of different options with that. We're just trying to build the smartest system, which is going to mean that some of that content is just like, yep, now you get a bunch of extra shared pages, and some of it will still be budgeted into their local pages. And again, that's going to mostly be on the e-edition days, because in print, of course, if there's a Twins game and it finishes in time for their print deadlines, if they want the Twins in print, or their readers want that in print, then we're going to make that happen. We're not going to take that out because it's going to be on a shared e-edition page. Becca asked, which newspapers will be the first the week of Labor Day? We have not officially determined that yet. Wilmer has volunteered to go first, but we have not officially decided. So that is one of the things we'll be deciding in the coming weeks. And, once we have decisions on some of that stuff, I will make sure that you all are getting regular updates. The other thing in terms of the e-edition pages, we plan to add more e-edition pages because we have a lot of content that across the network is of interest to our readers that right now the papers don't use because they only budget for themselves to have a few e-edition pages and they don't have room for it in their print papers. Like we have multiple food columnists and, each of them usually runs only in like 2 different papers. But, we can easily put the Lost Italian in multiple papers because people in Alexandria eat too. Like everybody eats. Our garden columns, as you guys may have noticed, our papers have really been heavily pushing are the Vault, which is all that true crime content. We've had a ton of murder in our papers lately. And, a lot of those are really interesting stories that some people who just go to the e-edition are not getting because there wasn't space. That local paper didn't budget it anywhere. We're also planning to identify things like that where it's like, okay, so, this story is not, it doesn't necessarily have a timely element to it. It's kind of evergreen. So we're going to hang on to that and then we can use it, whenever Dickinson comes up short by a half page, we got this one. It's great. So a lot of that going on as well. The editors really struggle with a lot of that right now because they're juggling so many different things and so many different days. And I'm sure they don't keep a list of like, here's evergreen content from 2 weeks ago that I didn't use. So. What else? Other questions? I expected a lot more questions from all of you. So, as always, I want to be as transparent with all of you as possible. Like whatever I know, I'll let you all know. I just don't know all the things right now because there's still a lot of it that we have to figure out. And that's what we're going to be spending the next month and a half doing, is figuring out all those pieces of it and make sure that we're really doing it right, that we're setting things up as best as possible. If you have questions during that time, please let me know. And if you think of things that, as you're doing something, you're like, I really hope that the pod helps address, this particular issue that I have, or this one thing that drives me nuts that, half of our papers are doing it this way and half of them are doing it another way. And we really need to fix that. Shoot me a message about all that stuff because all of that's on the table right now is figuring out how to make it easier to do our work while just doing really great work. So to take the frustrations out so we can just focus on just doing our jobs and doing it the best we can. And, that you all are able to do your jobs really quite great. You're fabulous. So. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we're going to wrap up here. I do have, for our tip of the week, Paula put together a nice document of different ways to use the Pathfinder tool with some geometric shapes and stuff like that. It sort of expands on what we had talked about a few weeks ago regarding the Pathfinder tool. It's just a couple of other different ways to use it. They're really interesting and things that I didn't know how to do, so I'm jazzed to have that. So when I send out the meeting, I will attach that document for all of you so you can look through it. I expect to see some sweet Pathfinder work in the next couple of months from all of you now that we've had 2 different tutorials and information on it. So thank you all for everything. I appreciate you. Have a great night.